Okay, so in your story, we left off last at Malaysia. No, that was when you were 9 years old. We were in Illinois. So what happened between then and where you are now?
Yeah, we started in Switzerland and moved to Illinois. Then we went to Southeast Asia on our way to Australia. When we visited Australia, I got to meet some of my Australian family, and it was a great vacation, but I didn't think too much of it. And 2 years, actually it was more, probably 4 years later, because I was 13 at the time, we moved to Australia. And it was a bit of a shock for me. I mean, I'd gone from a very different environment, starting school in the U.S., not just any school, but a particular type of school. It was the university primary school, which is kind of an experimental school, and then Swiss education, which is unique in and of itself, and then to Australian education, where I got to experience a public high school that was very much based on the Victorian style. Everybody sits in a classroom, somebody stands at the whiteboard and writes up whatever it is that we're supposed to be learning, and everybody furiously writes it down. And this solidified for me my strong sense that humans are often doing things that we should not be doing. Copying down notes seemed to me to be a terrible use of my time. I didn't feel like I was learning anything. My handwriting was neat when I got there, because in Switzerland we didn't write stuff down unless we were interpreting or synthesizing something. And it became very messy as I struggled to keep up with just copying down volumes and volumes of information. And the idea was that you would copy down all the information, you would then be told when the examination was, you'd be told what the topic of the examination was, you'd sit down and you'd read through your notes until you essentially memorize them. You'd go into the exam, you'd repeat what you'd memorized, you'd walk out of the exam and you'd forget it. You'd essentially forget what was in there, or at least I would.
Not just you, pretty much everyone.
Right. And I was like, there's got to be a better way. This to me did not, it seemed to be training me. And in retrospect, at the time I couldn't figure it out. I really disliked school, and I was fortunate enough that I was able to skip some grades, so I was able to finish school early. And thankfully I did that, because I don't know how I would have ended up if I'd continued to endure that. It really did not sit well with me at all. And in retrospect now, with greater awareness of more topics, I'm able to look back at that and realize that that's because that educational system was designed around factory work. And in factory work, our work is very mechanical, repetitive, and based on being able to memorize a sequence of steps and just apply them over and over again. So that style of education makes sense. We as humans are predisposed to following sequences. We're very good at following sequences. And a large part of education is about reinforcing that and teaching us all these mnemonics of who fought what war and how many people, like what year, and stuff that doesn't give you a real appreciation for what happened in history. So here I was, and I had these dreams when I learned that I was going to move to Australia of, wow, this is amazing. This is the place where solar cars could be a real thing. And I became obsessed with solar cars.
Why?
Because they had flat open spaces and plenty of sun. And so the World Solar Challenge, which was a bunch of cars that would race from the north to the south of part of the continent, that was really interesting to me. And I got there and I was very disappointed because nobody knew about it or had any interest in it whatsoever. And it was around that time that I really started to appreciate software, because in order for me to continue doing things in this field, and I had numerous papers that I had kind of scribbled out how to make magnetic-based train systems and all sorts of like stuff that I was kind of interested in. But in order to follow any of that, to get further, I would need hardware. I'd need stuff, physical stuff. And that was not going to be easy to get. So when I discovered computers, in a real sense, I realized that this one device, in and of itself, is nothing. What creates the value of that computer is then the soft code, which can be remanipulated over and over again and changed and altered, is what creates the value in that. So I, as a 13, 14, and 15-year-old, could easily work on software. And the best thing about it was that the computer would tell me whether or not I'd done it right or wrong, because if I'd made an error in a programming, it would tell me. So it was like an eternal source of information with no need for external stuff that I wouldn't have been able to procure.
It's like the sun.
It was amazing, right? It was like discovering the sun and going, wow, I have a resource here that could be used and reused constantly. And this was in the 90s, and at that time, computers were still esoteric. And at one time, I went to the university and I was allowed to log on to one of their computers while my mother was doing some studies. And so I'd gone along to the university. And they'd let me into this lab and were basically like, oh, okay, you like computers, we need to occupy you. Here, go into this lab. And I discovered this thing called the internet, which in 1991 or 2, that kind of time frame, was not much. There was basically a couple of protocols. The World Wide Web was not a thing. It was all very text-based, and you had to know kind of what you were doing, and there was just a couple of universities and things on it. It was not a real thing. But when I realized that I just typed a key and that had caused something to change in another country on the other side of the world, and that change was then communicated back to me, it was a revelation.
Was it also like instantaneous back then? It would take like 2 seconds.
Yeah, I mean, it took maybe 2 seconds, but compared to what we were used to back then, that was instantaneous, right? So that was again for me a mind-opening shift in what was possible.